My name is Jamin Gurker. I'm an associate real estate broker in the state of Alaska. I'm your first friend in Alaska, and the purpose of this podcast is to really talk about the issues that are important to you if you're considering moving up here and to really give you an idea for what it's like living up here. And today we're going to be talking about kind of infrastructure and the development of the MatSu Valley. This is obviously a very big part of South Central Alaska, arguably the most important part as we move forward into the future. And to do that today, we actually are very lucky to have Mike Brown. He is the borough manager, and he is going to be telling us all things MatSu today. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning.
Absolutely. So let's go and just jump into this then. It kind of feels like the MatSu has seen a population increase in recent years. Does it just feel that way, or is that really what you're seeing in the numbers?
Yeah, we are seeing that in the numbers. And what's interesting about that is that, I think here recently the Department of Labor the State Department of Labor released some new numbers that show projections through 2050, which we expect to see continued growth in our population.
Do we have any idea like what the projected growth is in the future?
I think what they were looking at through 2050, I think when you disaggregate Anchorage and MatSu is about a 28% growth. So it seemed to still be pretty significant. Maybe not at certain levels that we've seen in the past, but it does seem to be consistent. We've seen a couple of decades of consistent growth. We expect to see a couple of more.
Man, 28%. That's definitely a big growth for the MatSu.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day, and there was an article written in 1985 about the MatSu, and I think at that time the population was about 50,000, and then we received numbers from the state last week, I think it was, and they're projecting for this year in 2025 to be 116,000. So that's pretty remarkable growth in a 40-year period.
Yeah, no joke. Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of variables, but what has been kind of the big factors that have been driving this growth?
Yeah, I think it's more than just one thing, obviously. I think obviously land. We have just a large area out in the valley, places for people to settle, build homes, establish, their dream home or whatever that may look like. I think that we have a general approach where we're open for business. So we welcome growth, we welcome development. And I think you just see the natural beauty in the landscape. It's just phenomenal. Sometimes you just, you're very fortunate with what you have available. But I think, too, we're seeing policy decisions and other things from our local elected officials and whatnot that are also assisting and encouraging that growth and development. And so I think there are many reasons why people might be interested in settling in the MatSu.
Can you think of any examples of those policy decisions off the top of your head that have really spurred that growth?
Well, I mean, I'll use taxes as an example. I think, we are a limited form of government as a second-class borough. So, no, we don't offer, all the services that you might see in some municipalities. But I think we find a fit that works for our community. And then so one of those things is just managing our resources well and trying to keep tax rates relatively low. I think we have a great school system. I think that offers a lot of choice for parents and families, and that's a really important consideration for folks in terms of where they settle. So, I mean, those would be a couple of examples, I think, where folks look around and go, yeah, those things would tend to align with perhaps their priorities.
Absolutely. So what are kind of the advantages and the disadvantages of this amount of growth that we've seen in the MatSu?
Yeah, it definitely creates some challenges. I've given that some thought as I kind of look around at other communities in the state, like, schools. Like we're building schools right now, and voters just recently approved a proposition in November to build 3 new schools. So to move two of those facilities out of leased facilities and into borough-owned facilities, which, financially speaking, in the long term is going to be much better. But it also improves the educational program for those charter schools, which have been in existence for many, many years. So excited to see that. That's an example of a challenge because you have to figure out how do you fund that, how do you sustain it, how do you actually execute it. But the flip side of that coin is we could be talking about school closings. So I would argue that growth, has its challenges, but I would much rather be dealing with those problems. Transportation's another obvious one, with roads, traffic congestion. When you have that kind of growth, obviously developing and maturing your network and being able to complete those projects, and between the State Department of Transportation and local officials or local entities is really, really important, and that's something that we hear about all the time.
Right. So I guess looking specifically at the schools then, were we looking at like starting a completely new school or taking existing schools and putting them into, buildings owned by the borough?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about is existing facilities. And I think that's a great model. Like they've already proven themselves over a period of years, demonstrated that they have the enrollment to sustain a program. And so now what we're seeing is, now that that's the case, moving them into permanent borough facilities and out of leased facilities is really what 2 of the projects will do. The third one expands upon an existing facility that's borough-owned to expand to a grade 9 through 12 program.
Gotcha. No, that's probably the best way to approach it with education, because I've seen some communities that really just go all in on a school right from the jump, and it's kind of like if you run a business like that, you're probably going to go broke pretty often. So
yeah, and I think seeing the voters approve that proposition with those 3 schools in it would illustrate there's some confidence in those programs and that they're going to continue. And again, they are proven and been around for many years. So I think that is a good approach. That way, you're running with a winner.
absolutely. So, as you kind of alluded to, like there are growing pains once you're, growing and developing and, maturing as a community. And that does kind of bring us to the topic of the comprehensive plan. A lot of people, I think they hear a comprehensive plan, they'll just kind of nod along, and most of us don't really understand what that is. So why don't you go ahead and just explain to us real quick what a comprehensive plan is?
Yeah, so we have been working on a comprehensive plan. We kind of put a pause on that last year just because we had other planning efforts and staff that we needed to focus on bringing those things across the finish line. So I would expect we'll pick that effort back up later this calendar year. It's really kind of your umbrella or overarching plan that kind of talks about what your values and your aspirations are. There is a component where you want to then be able to take those values and aspirations and connect them to things that are more pragmatic or practical in terms of how you advance development in your community. So we will be picking that up and advancing it again. A couple of the plans that we're working on now that kind of said, hey, we need to pause this for a moment are a couple of plans that have the opportunity to improve or affect a couple of larger upcoming transportation projects. So we wanted to make sure we had that component built in before those projects really start to advance.
Right. So the comprehensive plan is almost like the true north then for like all these other projects moving forward. Is that?
Well, I think it provides kind of a guiding framework to all the other plans that we develop that support that, to make sure there's alignment. I think one of the things that's interesting about our community is it's a community of communities. And so there's a lot of diversity in the different communities that we have across the borough. I mean, we have 3 incorporated cities within our borough. But we also have Talkeeton and some other places too, which may not be incorporated necessarily, but really are their own individual communities. And so we also want to recognize and respect that, right? And so it does provide an overarching framework, but at the same time, I think it's important to know that we have to recognize that. So, for example, we have 20 community councils. I think we'll probably grow to 21 this year. And, and everybody has a different take on what they want to see in their area. So I think one of the things that's good about what we generally do is recognize and acknowledge that and make sure there's space for that diversity to exist, so that we're not trying to take a one-size-fits-all approach from the borough and apply that everywhere across the borough our size. I mean, just the geography alone of 25,000 square miles it would be kind of unrealistic to think that we're just going to take a one-size-fits-all and apply it everywhere.
What is the process then? I mean, obviously not the step by step, because that'd be like 50 steps. I'm assuming. Anytime we
Yeah.
start talking about planning with the
Right.
borough, but what is kind of the overall process for creating a comprehensive plan? It doesn't sound like it's top down. It sounds like it's a little bit more back and forth, maybe bottom up.
Yeah, I think it's more of a grassroots. I mean, there's a great deal in a comprehensive plan. There's a great deal of community outreach. That's really the key. Is can you go out, have public meetings in all these different places, listen to people, listen to what the issues are, listen to what their priorities are, and then try to find a way to bring all that together in a way that reflects the overall, and again, still respects some of the individual. So, that's why it's typically a pretty time-consuming process, and so that's. I also don't think it's something that needs to be rushed. I mean, it's been many years since we updated, but like I just mentioned, the 40-year mark, years ago, like when you've experienced this kind of growth and development, obviously things are going to change. And I think what we're seeing happen, well, it is happening, is you have this urbanized area, this core area where about 70,000 of those 115, 16,000 folks are, and then the more rural areas. And so even that urban-rural divide, if you will, or need, it's different. So, we kind of see that happening too. So it is interesting to try to put a comprehensive plan around all of that.
Have you noticed? I mean, I'm sure you guys have been to meetings and everything. What are some of the big differences between like priorities in these communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's, one of the things that we see, and we're probably going to continue to see more of just with the amount of growth that we're having, is land use and land use regulations and development and what regulations you want to have in place and how you might want to guide and or restrict development. I mean, I think that's always going to be contentious just by the nature of it, because you're going to have competing priorities. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just one of those challenges that comes with growth and development. And so our job, or our elected officials' role, is really to navigate what is that right balance.
No, that's big. What are some of the projected shifts? Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there are going to be any big shifts in the comprehensive plan from what was written before versus what the new one would be?
No, I don't. Not as an overarching framework. I think what it does, I mean, because we're already seeing and recognizing some of the areas where we need to make, improvements, considerable improvements. Like when I took this job about 4 years ago, it was transportation. It was roads. And so that's something that's been a focal point for us, trying to find a rhythm for developing projects, making improvements. We have a corridor access management planned effort on what we call the Bogard Seldon Corridor, which is a larger east-west corridor for us in the valley. And so we want to see improvements there, and the corridor access management plan gives us a really tangible way to do that and put some things in place that will improve that experience for everyone and really the flow of goods and services along that corridor. So, I mean, that would be one example. And I think some of that, you kind of have to look at and figure out how do you want to target and prioritize your efforts, because not every area is experiencing the same thing. We do see growth in pockets and in areas, and that ebbs and flows a little bit from year to year over a span of 5 years. And so you want to be able to adjust to that and at the same time not try to treat every community in the same way, because some are relatively, especially in some of the more rural areas, are fairly, static in their growth.
Yep, absolutely. So, I mean, I've kind of seen this just in my time working in real estate and kind of servicing these different areas. I've certainly seen those areas that it looks like the development is really taking off. For you in your position, like, can you identify some areas that maybe there's a lot of development taking off?
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of growth in the Knik Fairview area down Knik Goosebay Road many years ago, until I think to some degree that road kind of got a bad name in terms of safety. The Department of Transportation has stepped in, and the state's made it a priority. The governor's made it a priority as a safety corridor. I think this year we'll finish up, really the first larger phases of that project. There's some more that will be occurring on down the road, but as a divided 4-lane, that's really improved safety. It's improved the flow of goods and services. So, what that means for growth, and will that, kind of allow that to kind of peak, or not peak, but kind of step up or ramp up again. And then we've seen a lot of growth in what we call the fishhook triangle, which is kind of that Wasilla, Palmer, fishhook, Bogard area, that triangle. And so we have a lot of efforts right now in there to kind of make some improvements to the road system, complete connections that would provide for a better network to support folks, because that development is going to continue to happen up in Hatcher Pass. We're seeing the recreational opportunities just expand and really explode. Pretty exciting what Ski Talk's doing, Government Peak Rec area, what those opportunities are going to do for us from just recreation and tourism in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely vouch for that. One thing I've known is just working with some clients in kind of that Hatcher Pass area is they've already had like big corporations reach out to them, like trying to acquire their large pieces of land, just because that's kind of the projected improvements in the area, just with that potentially becoming more of a, maybe not LA-esque, but maybe trending more in that direction.
Sure.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So I've definitely seen that. What do you think the odds are of us ever getting a road going all the way from pretty much along the entire feet of the mountain? So like we can go from Tenina to Hatcher Pass in like 10 minutes instead of like 40.
Yeah. I mean, the terrain, land ownership, all of those things weigh in. I think there are a lot of other projects, transportation-wise, in terms of like where would you take your transportation dollars and invest them, that will probably go elsewhere. I think that is probably not in the foreseeable future.
All right, I'll ask a community council, see if I can get a movement going.
That's right.
So just wrapping up on the comprehensive plan then. I mean, we're not rushing it, but do we have an idea when you want to have that updated?
Oh, I don't have a target in mind right now. There's a few other efforts that we're trying to wind up now so that we can assign staff back to picking that project up and moving it forward again. Obviously, there'll be some additional public outreach that will be needed, so I probably wouldn't want to commit to a time, but it is something that we have intent to complete in the near future. I mean, it's not helpful when we pick these projects up and don't establish good completion dates, because then they just kind of linger on. But I'm pretty excited about some of those planning efforts that we have going right now that we should be wrapping up here in the next several months, that we can kind of put a completed stamp on and move on to other things.
What are some of those projects you're about to complete?
Yeah, well, the corridor access management plan is an important one, because it kind of talks about those connections and how it affects that Bogard Seldon Corridor. And we recently, the Borough and the Department of Transportation received some community transportation program funding, which is federal highway dollars, to advance some projects on that corridor. So having this work done in advance of those projects standing up and moving into design would be really helpful. Then it makes a lot more sense, because the corridor access management plan is looking at those connections, land use, and things like that, and that can all be used to inform those projects. So I think the timing of that is important, so that we can feed that information into those pre-design and planning efforts for those specific road projects, because then we can take what we just planned and implement it, which is a really good scheme. It's never fun to plan stuff and then just look at it set on a shelf and not get a lot of traction. So that's one of the bigger efforts right now that's ongoing, that hopefully will get run down and completed, and hopefully that can be used to support input to those other projects.
Outstanding. So let's move on to the tunnel/bridge. I know that's
we like to jokingly call it the canal.
The canal, yeah. So this is for people who've lived here for a long time.
Sure.
Like you mentioned this, and like old timers will roll their eyes and say we've been talking about this for years, and it hasn't happened yet. So why, from your perspective, from what you can see, why is it still persisting as an idea? Like it hasn't happened, but it's also not gone away.
Right. No, I hope it doesn't. For the record, I mean, when you look at transportation and the transportation system on a more regional, like when you kind of zoom out and look at it regionally, and you just look at the natural terrain, right, and what we have geographically with rivers, mountains. I mean, it drives you into doing certain things. Right now, we have one way in and one way out of Anchorage. Our population continues to grow. Obviously, we have a lot of workforce that commutes into the Anchorage area. We're seeing a lot of development in our own out there, and that having that corridor, I mean, really, we are one bridge. Well, there's a couple of key bridges, but one bridge across the Knick Arm where you're like, yeah, that's kind of an important consideration, because not only do our people commute, our residents, that's your corridor to interior Alaska. To get north, whether you're going to the North Slope all the way or whether you're going into the Fairbanks area or any community north of the valley. So I think from a resiliency perspective, that should be an important consideration. And so when you look at the Knick Arm Crossing or a tunnel or whatever that ends up being, having a way to get to interior Alaska that doesn't involve the Glen Highway and the Parks Highway, at least through Wasilla, should be an important consideration. So when we look at the Parks Highway alternative corridor, which DOT was looking at and paused, which is also known as the Wasilla bypass, like, why take all that traffic congestion that's going from Anchorage to Fairbanks, for example? Why should that go through downtown Wasilla? Like, and that's the whole, like, makings of a Wasilla bypass. And you're like, well, essentially, the Knick Arm Crossing could be that bypass. I mean, somebody, the point is that should be studied, and that's what we're kind of advocating for, is a more regional look at these projects, because Glen Highway expansion, Parks Highway alternative corridor, you start doing the math on project cost, it's probably not remarkably different than building a bridge across the Knick Arm.
Right. Well, not only that, but once you go and create that corridor, I mean, we kind of talked about this before. You're going to run into a lot of issues with eminent domain and having to really impact a lot of communities that have just kind of grown up thinking that they were, always going to be in the sticks and no one was ever going to bug them. And now you've got a big bypass going right through your backyard. So, yeah, I'm sure it'll probably make a lot of other communities happier doing the bridge if the alternative is you're going to have this quasi-highway just coming right through the area that you're living in now.
Yeah, and I think the bypass doesn't fundamentally solve congestion or emissions issues. Like, so why bring all that into the core area of the valley if, and in the end, when you look at commerce and the idea of moving it more effectively, it's probably more effective to have an alternative corridor that takes you to interior Alaska if that's what you're doing, from a trucking, shipping perspective, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So even if you do make the corridor, it's just going to get you back to the Glen Highway, which is
back to Parks.
Back to Parks, yeah. That is just going to be that single way in and out. So.
Yeah, and I mean, with the Knick Arm Crossing, it would leverage other transportation infrastructure that already exists, right? So when you start looking at, well, what happens when it lands in the Point McKenzie area? What do you do with that? Well, there's an existing road system. There are already improvements being made to it in different ways. Knik Goosebay has had millions invested in it in terms of improvements, and some of those are continuing. The borough's making investments into Point McKenzie Road. So there are options, on a larger regional transportation basis that might make more sense. And what we're advocating for is just somebody should take a look at that on a more regional basis. And when we say somebody, we're talking about the Department of Transportation. And whether it's a Knik Arm Crossing or something else, I think it just, when you consider, well, what's your other option today? Do a 6-lane Glen Highway? Just thinking about the bridge expansion, even the right-of-way would need to be acquired. Those types of things along that entire corridor would be extremely costly. And so when you look at if you're continuing to plan population growth through 2050, it seems that the problem's inevitable. We're going to need that corridor. I mean, a lot of goods and services come in through Anchorage to even get to interior Alaska. So I would argue it's a bigger problem than MatSu.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all that being said, and it being, looks like it's on paper, it really does make sense. And, this checks a lot of boxes for us, solves a lot of problems. Why has the bridge not happened yet?
Oh, I think, at least from what I understand, I wasn't in the state at that time. Well, at least for some of those conversations, was, just cost. I think people are very put off back then. I think it was around $1.5 billion or something like that. And I mean, that is a lot of money. But when you start looking at some of these other projects, one of the things one of the questions we had for DOT was like, what are the rough cost estimates if you had to do a Wasilla bypass? And I think it's probably somewhere near $500 million. And so if you're like, if we're going to put $500 million here, and then you've got this Parks or this Glen Highway expansion needed, and maybe that's not needed for another 20 years or so, but those larger type projects would take at least 10 years to develop. So it really isn't that far out, I don't think, in terms of like when you would need to really plan it and start to develop a project. And so just looking at that and going, there might be a better way to do this, and it might connect to a project that has existed. And maybe 20 years ago, it was ahead of its time. I'm not sure that that's always going to be the case. And so I appreciate the fact that the Department of Transportation is looking at the tunnel option, whether it's a tunnel or a bridge. Technology evolves, our engineering and design, all those things evolve over time. Yeah, maybe it's worth revisiting and trying to see what is the best investment of those transportation dollars, over the next 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, do we have any idea when their reports will be coming out?
I don't. I am meeting with the commissioner to kind of talk about, hey, he actually invited us to participate, which I appreciate. I think I'll give Commissioner Anderson a lot of credit. I think he's been very open, very willing to sit down, talk about things, look at options, not being afraid to have those conversations. So I'm excited about that opportunity. At this point, that's really all I know. But yeah, it's kind of a fascinating concept. At this point, like I said, we just kind of want to look at the regional transportation, like a traffic study that would talk about and be able to quantify these things so people can see what those impacts might look like in the near future.
Absolutely. So, I mean, one of the other benefits that we kind of mentioned before was that if a bridge, tunnel, whatever is developed going from North Anchorage to Point Mac, is the very real possibility that you're going to have like almost 2 new towns just overnight, tentatively, possibly getting created and creating an entirely new tax base. Is that something that DOT takes into consideration as well as not just the cost, but also, this could be an entirely new tax base?
Well, I think they would consider the economic impacts of that new corridor. I don't know that the state, like in it, like if we're talking about a tax base, really like from property taxes, that would benefit the borough. We don't really look at it through that lens. We're really just looking at it through the lens of what's the best alternative for transportation. I do think it opens up other possibilities in that area when you really look at what's happening in the Point McKenzie area, what's available in the West Susitna. Tons of opportunity out there. And I think not just for the MatSu. I think it really has a regional or statewide positive impact, or at least there's an opportunity for that. And so when I kind of look at that, it makes sense to make transportation investments in that area to help enable that type of development.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll definitely continue watching that with great interest, just moving forward. I mean, I've got property in the MatSu and in Anchorage, so obviously I'm pretty keyed into that.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It'll be fun to see. Kind of talking, switching gears here, going to the Glen Highway overhaul. So first off, real quick, how important is the Glen Highway to the MatSu Valley?
Yeah, it's critical, and it's not just critical to us. I already kind of mentioned the access to the interior. I mean, interior Alaska lives off of the Glen Highway, right? Indirectly. Well, really directly. I mean, when you think about the goods and services that come in through Anchorage, that all gets on a highway and makes its way north, whether it goes into the MatSu, north of MatSu, or into Fairbanks, or even to the North Slope. You see that all the time. You can see trucks that are on the road that are headed to Prudhoe because of the nature of the cargo that they have on the truck. So I think it's vital to the state of Alaska. It really isn't about MatSu or even Anchorage for that matter. It really is, the Glen and the parks. Very specifically, that corridor that heads to interior Alaska is vital to commerce in the state. So very, very important. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider, and it kind of goes back to that point I made earlier about resilience.
Yeah. What all will the work entail? Because they're talking about like a sizable project getting rolled out here. So what all will the work entail?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more detail on that. I mean, because that's what's really going to allow us to figure out what the impacts are going to be in terms of like lane closures and things like that, or detour routes, so that we can have a better understanding. But there's no doubt it's going to have an impact. But I kind of go back to what I said earlier. Like, I would rather have the challenges accompanied with growth, which I would argue that's what this is, versus those of a static population and really limited growth and opportunity. So as much as it is an inconvenience, we've seen it in a number of different projects: Knik Goosebay Road, Seward Meridian Parkway, the Glen Highway, the Parks Highway, where there's been efforts, to expand it into Big Lake or up towards the Big Lake turnoff, or even the Glen Highway going up past Palmer. Like, I guess I would argue it's a good problem to have. I mean, it is definitely an inconvenience. Nobody loves, summer construction season, if you will. But that's kind of the nature of living up here. It's a very short season, so they have to be very aggressive. But in the end, I would kind of just remind folks, like, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We keep having winters like this. Maybe we can get this knocked out in just a couple years. Like,
that's true with the way things are right now. Yeah, that's a fact.
40 degrees in January.
It's kind of nuts.
But what is, do you know kind of off the top of your head what the projected start completion date is? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of moving goalposts here.
I don't off the top of my head. I think DOT will be pretty. I think they'll be pretty aggressive in their outreach and their communications, because nobody's confused about the impact this is going to have, especially during summer. I mean, with all the tourism, a lot of folks use that road that are coming even from out of state in the lower 48. So it's going to be messy.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see, like, if this is going to impact like teleworking in the region, just because we're talking about funneling like all the traffic down to, in some places, like one lane. Mm-hmm. So, for a lot of employers, it may make sense more to allow some of their employees to do like some kind of a telework, and that does kind of raise the question, okay, does that have any other unforeseen economic consequences in the area? Do we see more people trying to find jobs in the MatSu because they're like, man, I am done sitting in this traffic while they're doing this for the next couple of years? Like,
yeah, I think that you already have folks feeling that way. I mean, people I talk to, employees we hire, you hear it pretty regularly, is I don't think anybody desires to commute to Anchorage. And certainly we see more development in the area, in the region, where there are more of those living wage jobs. I mean, obviously the service industry is growing, but we're seeing growth in other areas too. So, and you're right. Like post-COVID, I mean, the technology evolved. We got kind of put through the ringer a bit, and there are opportunities to potentially do some remote work, maybe provide some relief on some of the congestion that may be occurring, at least temporarily. So we'll see how folks adjust to that. It will be interesting for sure. And it's kind of that thing. You live through the pain of the project, and then when you're done, you're really happy with the outcome, and you see the real benefit and the value. So, yeah, I think it's just one of those things. It's the nature of where we live, with the short construction season, the growth, and we'll just have to do our best to navigate it. It's temporary.
Yeah, well, let's hope so.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, yeah, what can you do, like, from the borough perspective, like, once this actually starts happening? Like, we can't, like, build any, like, new roads or anything, like, connecting with Anchorage. So what can you do as a borough once this happens?
I don't think the borough would have much to do there. I mean, obviously, a lot of it's just going to be about communicating with folks and managing expectations around what those things are going to be. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some businesses, like if you're shipping goods, maybe you adjust your timing. Maybe you do some things during more off hours to avoid some of those peak traffic volumes. I mean, there are things folks can do, and I guess everyone will have to make that decision for themselves. to try to determine, what's going to work best and what that's going to look like.
Right. Just another reason for the bridge, though.
Well, I think an alternate corridor, I think, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think it's going to highlight that awareness for folks. And it'll probably cause folks to go, why don't we have another way to do this? Because, it would be very helpful. And I'm not saying it would work for everyone. I don't see people commuting from Palmer to Anchorage through Point McKenzie.
Yeah.
But it certainly could take a lot of traffic and provide another way. And all of that commercial traffic, if you will, that's headed to interior Alaska or otherwise would probably already be using a different route. And so I think it'll be interesting because I think it'll highlight to folks around the state, maybe there's a better way.
Yep, and we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of hours sitting in traffic on the Glen, looking over across the inlet where it could be, and a lot of soul searching then. But we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely.
So we'll kind of call this just the open mic portion of our discussion here. Are there any topics you would like to kind of direct people's attention to?
Yeah, the one thing we haven't talked a lot about, because I have about 5 or 6 things that are on our radar day to day when I think about just like growth and development, would be our recreational opportunities. And I think the Valley has a lot to offer. We're seeing that in some of the data that we have, where we even see visitors from Anchorage coming out to recreate because we have access, right? We got great trailheads, great parks, just a great natural landscape. And we talked about Hatcher Pass already. Some of those opportunities, we're seeing a lot of development in the Settlers Bay Coastal Park area. That's going to become just a really, really nice area for us, for people to recreate, so we can spread that across the borough. So really excited about those opportunities. We're working on Jonesville, which is up in the Sutton area, to create a shooting range or a shooting park down the line and really take what people are already doing to recreate, make it safer, make it better, provide some amenities, the basic amenities and whatnot. So we're going to push hard this year on getting a project ready to start some construction in 2026 is our goal. And we're working with the Department of Natural Resources on that and the Sutton community. So I'm really excited about that. The visitors that we see go into that area are just mind-blowing. People coming out to recreate, whether it's ATVs, to shoot, to camp, just whatever that looks like. So even hiking and stuff like that. So really excited about that opportunity. I think that's going to be good for the region, not just the MatSu. Based on the numbers that I've seen, I think we have about the same number of people coming from Anchorage to recreate out there as we do from the Valley, which to me was pretty astonishing, frankly. So, so we have a lot to offer in that way, too. We also have the Gateway Visitor Center, which will be a visitor center right there, kind of the gateway, right? Access to the MatSu along the Glen Highway going towards Palmer. That will start construction this summer. And I think once they get the highway project done and we get the visitor center completed, just that access coming out is going to be pretty cool. It's going to look great. It's got a great view shed, great areas to access, and lots of opportunities to expand on that for people that are visiting MatSu. So pretty excited about that opportunity as well from a kind of a tourism perspective.
Yeah, where's that going to be located?
Yeah, there's a sign. It's been there for many years now, but it's as you come, if you're heading north on the Glen Highway and you take the Glen Highway towards Palmer, it's right as you kind of come up that first hill on the right side of the road, just before you get to Kepler Bradley.
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about then. Yeah, that's a great view of
it's
Pioneer.
Amazing.
Okay, that's a good pick for a location.
That is a great location, and so really excited. Hopefully, we'll have by the time the state fair kicks off later this year, we'll probably have a good bit of that under construction. So folks will be seeing that as they come in and out of the valley, and really excited about that opportunity. It's going to be really cool. Even for Alaskans, but also for all the visitors that we see, on RVs and stuff that are transiting through that area in the summers.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's like I don't think a lot of people really appreciate just how much there is to do out in the MatSu Valley.
That's right.
Like I just recently discovered the Government Peak area.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't know what I was expecting, but went out there and I was like, man, this is way more developed than I thought it was going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what's fun about the partnerships. I mean, we have Government Peak. We run that, the borough does. We manage that Hatcher Pass area, rec area, but Ski Talk's its own separate nonprofit. So we work with them. We invest in them. We're going to provide some funding to do improved access road so we can get buses in there so kids can get there from schools and you can bring motor coaches in safely. So they're a great partner. We love working with them. And like I mentioned, Settlers Bay, Jonesville, like there's just a lot of the Butte, all the different places, trailheads. We've got a great trail crew, great Parks and Rec staff. So we're really working on continuing to develop those opportunities and make them a place where people want to be. Because to your point, like if folks are considering moving up here, they want a place to recreate. And so that's a really important priority for us. And one of the things when I came into the job, I'm like, yep, folks are going to want to know about transportation, education, and and emergency services. But our folks probably put recreational access right up there with that top three. So it's kind of really just phenomenal how much priority folks put on being able to get outdoors, recreate, and having just really a vast array of opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I, moved out to Wasilla, I was talking to some folks and I was, just said, okay, what's there to do around here? And literally everyone started laughing at me. So I'm glad to see like we're seeing a shift there, cause
Absolutely.
outstanding. Well, Mike, thank you very much for coming on to the show and kind of sharing your insights and your perspective. And it's always exciting to hear what you guys have going on over at the MatSu Borough Department. So I really do appreciate you coming on here and sharing all that. And looking forward to having you on here hopefully again sometime in the near future.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity.